All right, hello and welcome to Politics and Government, Laying the Groundwork, Lesson 1.1. This is the first video that you're encountering for your lesson, so make sure that you have your guided notes, right? This is where we're going to be taking our guided notes are in these lesson intro videos. By now, you should have already watched the Introduction to the Standard video, okay? So we're working currently on Standard GC01. Examine the influence of leading European thinkers and other roots of American government. At this time, make sure you have the correct guided notes. If you do not, please talk to me, your teacher, and I will make sure that you have a copy of those. Okay, so take a second, make sure that you're ready to go, and then we'll get started. The lesson objective for 1.1 is the following. Student will be able to define politics and government and identify the relationship between the two. So what that means is that by the time you have turned in your exit ticket to me, you will be able to do exactly this, okay? So let's get started. Some quick definitions. What is government, right? This is the whole point of this entire class. Government is the institutions and processes through which decisions are made for a group of people, also called a society. There are three main components of government, that is people, powers, and policies. And we're going to go into each one of these a bit more in the next few slides. So people, what does this mean? Remember, people is the first component of government. Government includes people who are elected as elected officials with control over others, okay? So an example could be a mayor, a senator, or even the President of the United States, okay? There's a second category of people, and these are people that we would consider public servants. So they're in charge of carrying out the day-to-day activities of government, okay? Because there are a lot of different things that the government actually accomplishes on a day, on a week, year by year, over the course of many years. So examples of these people that we would consider public servants would be a postal worker, maybe. Postal worker works for the United States Postal Service. They are a government employee, okay? There's also a police officer. A police officer is not an employee of the national government, but they are employed by a more local government, okay? So for example, a county or a city, right? So Memphis Police Department, the people that work for them, Memphis police officers, are employed by the city of Memphis, which is another form of government. It's city government. And then maybe a local judge, for example, someone who rules on divorce cases or local criminal cases, okay? This is a public servant. The second component of government is power. And power is the government's authority and their ability to get things done. So it's authority and ability. That's power, okay? And it's the second component of government. There are three different forms that a government can have this power. Three different forms in which the government's power can manifest, okay? The first is legislative. And you'll learn a lot more about this when we talk about the American legislative branch, but for now, just think of this in general terms, right? This is for all governments. These are the three different forms that power can manifest, okay? So first, legislative is the power to make laws, okay? The power to actually decide what should be a law and why. The second form of government power is executive. And this is going to be the power to carry out and enforce a law. You might see a root word in that word executive. That would be execute. Execute means to put into action, okay? The third form of government power is judicial. And this is the power to interpret interpret law, the actual language of the law, and to settle disputes between members of a society, right? So if Jim and John can't agree over who hit the car first, then they can take that to court, right? They can have a judge decide who hit John's car, right? The third component of government is policies. Okay, so a policy, and this is an important term to understand, a policy is any decision made by a government in order to meet a goal. Okay, so the government looks out at the country or the group of people and says, all right, I want this to happen, right? This sort of thing needs to happen in order for society to be better. In order to make that goal happen, they set a policy. Now, policies can take the form of laws, government programs, or specifically government actions. Okay, and we'll talk a lot more about this in the future, but for right now, just understand this in a more general term. There are a few areas that government cares about, that the government has to make decisions about. So these would be taxation, okay, defense, so the military, environmental protection, so setting rules about where you can dump waste, healthcare, right, whether or not people should have it, whether or not the government should be helping poor people with healthcare, whether the government should even be making decisions about healthcare. And then finally, transportation, so roads and air traffic, okay, and boat traffic, and the actual how easy it should be to fly and to travel across states or even internationally, okay? These are areas that government has to make decisions about. There are 5 basic functions of government, okay? And the US government fulfills all of these, but this is true for any form of government, okay? Any form of national government, I should say. So the first is to ensure national security. And on your guided notes, you should have this exact chart. I'm just going to ask you to fill it in, okay? So the first function, as I said, is to ensure national security. And this is and the way this happens is the government protects the nation's people and territory from external threats, okay? So a good example of this is the US military, all right? Well, let's take the example of the Navy, for example. The U.S. has several Navy fleets that patrol the waters they patrol oceans all around the world, okay, ensuring that American interests are protected, okay? It's very unlikely that we will ever be attacked on our own shores because we're very good at defense as a country. And that comes from the first function of government, which is to ensure national security. The second function is to maintain order. And this is done through police and the legal system. The focus here being on internal order, okay? Making sure that people within the borders are safe, making sure they're healthy, okay? This is the maintenance of order. The third function is that of resolving conflict. Okay, so the way this manifests is the government does what it can to provide means to resolve conflicts through politics and the legal system. Okay, so conflict arises constantly, right, in a group of people in a society. Okay, and in order to make sure that everything doesn't dissolve into chaos, right, the government has to find a way to resolve conflicts, whether this is between people, whether this is between groups of people, okay? This is a critical component of the actual functions of government. The government is also there to provide services, okay? And this is the one that's probably most familiar to the vast majority of Americans. The government provides a variety of services ranging from education, okay, public education, to public transportation, which are all paid for with tax dollars, okay? And we'll talk a lot more about taxes as we go along, and we'll definitely talk about them when we get to economics in the second semester. But for right now, understand that a tax is simply the government's way of paying for something, okay? So there's an income tax on every American who works, right? And it's just a small percentage of your income that you give to the government, okay? And a lot of things are paid for with that income tax, okay? The government taxes a lot of things, right? Food tax, gasoline tax, but all that money goes towards something that the government has to pay for, okay? And that's why we often call these public services, because everybody is paying in, everybody's being taxed, so everybody's contributing a certain amount of money to make sure that this service is available, okay? And then finally, the fifth function of government is to provide for the public good. And this looks like the government making decisions and policies that attempt to balance the public good, okay, what the public needs, with the needs of smaller groups in the population. Okay, we call this the conflict between public good and individual right. Okay, so a good example of this is vaccines. Okay, so I'm sure you've heard of a vaccine, right? It's a preventive measure. It's something that you get injected into your body to make sure that you don't get a certain disease later in life. Now, generally speaking, the government requires that you get a vaccine because the government wants to ensure, because they're providing for the public good, that people, by and large, are healthy, right? If we can avoid things like chickenpox, the government would like to do that. But sometimes there are people in a population, in a society, that don't want to take the vaccine. They think it's unhealthy, or maybe they can't because they are allergic, whatever, okay? The government has to find a balance between these competing interests, right? Public good versus individual right, okay? That's the dynamic there. The government has to find that balance and ensure that we're all safe. Both the people that don't want the vaccine and also the people that do want the vaccine. Okay, just for that example of the vaccine. So again, these are the 5 functions of government. Hopefully you jotted down some notes. Take a minute, pause, make sure you've got all this information. And we're going to move on. So, what is politics? Remember, we've just been talking about government, so now let's dip into politics. Politics is the process by which government makes and carries out its decisions. So we often refer to the political process. And the political process provides an opportunity for a society to pursue different interests, okay? Because if you are participating in the political process, you are trying to influence the decisions that government is making, right? If you, for example, vote in an election, then you're helping decide who is going to be representing you in Congress. And that person, by representing you in Congress, is going to be able to influence whether or not certain laws are passed, whether or not certain decisions are made at the national level. Finally, politics is also about debating issues and policies. We've already talked about what policies are, right? Remember, policies are the things that government puts into place in order to achieve a certain goal. These things have to be debated. They have to be discussed, okay? Just because Senator so-and-so thinks it's a good idea doesn't mean it's a good idea necessarily, right? It has to be discussed, it has to be debated, it has to be hashed out, okay? Politics is the arena in which this takes place, okay? That's where it happens. So a quick summary, all right? And jot down what you can from this slide, okay? So to summarize the relationship between politics and government, I mean, you probably already have an idea because you probably began to see the connections. But in summary, it looks like this, okay? Government consists of the people who make the decisions, the power to make those decisions, and the policies that make up those decisions. Politics is the process by which all these decisions are made, okay? And by which the government actually carries out its decisions, all right? So it's a fairly simple relationship, okay? Anything the government wants to do, it has to do through politics, okay? Politics is how those decisions are made, whereas government is more about the people that are making those decisions, and the reason they're making those decisions, and what those actual decisions consist of. Okay, so the policies that make up those decisions. All right. So we're going to talk a lot more about this in the future, right? This was an introduction video, lesson 1.1 on politics and government. So thank you for your attention. Feel free to rewind, go back, find the information that you may be missing in your guided notes, and go ahead and begin work on lesson 1.1 assignment. Okay, we'll see you next time.